Dear guests, good afternoon. I am Pauline Vengeon, Director of Alliance Française Kathmandu, and I am very pleased to welcome you here for this panel discussion, This Matter of Culture, about our evolving world of multiculturalism, globalization, migration, and connectivity, organized in cooperation with the Embassy of France in Nepal, the Nepal Economic Forum, and Alliance Française de Kathmandu. Now, I would like to welcome His Excellency Yves Carmona, Ambassador of France in Nepal.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming in this renovated auditorium of Alliance Française de Kathmandu. Tonight's debate is the fourth one in a sequence which started with January 2017 Night of Ideas about landlocked developing countries, followed in June the same year with Time for Action on the same theme. And this year, 2018, being the 50th anniversary of May 68's so-called revolution, we wondered if imagination had taken the power. And tonight we look at current interactions between multicultural Nepal and the international civil society as one example of the power of imagination. All these debates have been organized in an exciting spirit of collaboration between the Nepal Economic Forum, SUJIV, Alliance Française de Kathmandu, Pauline and her predecessor, and the French Embassy, with the occasional support of Institut Français, which is based in Paris. But this time, without any support from Paris, we had to rely on our own means, which restricted us to this a bit warm but cozy hall of Alliance Française. And I'm sure many more people are watching us live on the internet. I hope so anyway. So what is the common thread between these debates? While reflecting on landlockedness, we had to face a reality, which is that it's so much easier to build empires and powerful economies when you have a wide, flat territory with fluid connectivity. Nepal, being graced with the highest mountains in the world and the deepest valleys in the world, no oil, and two giant countries as neighbors, Nepal has to be much smarter than the others to find its way to independent development. The French 16th century philosopher and economist Jean Bodin, whom everybody knows, proclaimed "Il n'est de richesse que d'hommes," which translates in "there is no richness but humans." More recently, after the oil shocks in the 70s, one official slogan said, "La France n'a pas de pétrole, mais elle a des idées." France doesn't have any oil, but it has ideas. Nepal has no lack of humans, of a very sophisticated fabric, and producing no oil but ideas. And I would like tonight's debate to reflect on that. First point, Nepal has been for all times in touch, in contact, if not intricate, with India, China, Tibet, the Muslim world, and through it, even Western Europe. With a French sense of plurality, historically we would call this region les Indes, the Indias, plural, encompassing what today is called South Asia, and Nepal was part of it. Second, Nepal managed to avoid outright colonization, but it was deeply influenced since the 19th century by the British in their strategy of protection domination. Later, during the Cold War, Nepal couldn't avoid being exposed to the rivalry of superpowers. I don't name them, you know who they have been. But strongly attached to its political independence, not willing, neither being able to isolate from all the surrounding struggles, Nepal has succeeded at being friends with all of them, preferring soft power to hard power. The Himalayas' attraction, outstanding religious and cultural heritage, tolerance toward the Westerners, whether being luminaries or spaced-out crazies, who flocked into the valley starting from the 60s, gave Nepal the opportunity to keep away from most of the tragedies which were happening in Asia at the same time all around. And isn't that a success of interculturality? Third point, still cross-cultural relationships are not a guarantee for lasting peace and happiness. People have to feel comfortable in their identity to benefit from them. If not, there is a risk of conflict when some people, or some peoples, fear that they will lose to others. In the past, in history, conflicts have time and again erupted all over the world for material concerns. One king would invade a weaker country to grab its land, its resources, its workers, its factories, or to expand its own population, etc. Class struggle has not been different. An impoverished and dominated class would fight the rulers to get more money, means of production, etc. But what we can see today in a globalized world is more and more a different kind of imbalance, leading to conflicts no less bloody than those of the past. Multicultural friction sometimes leading to wars, including civil wars, the way we've seen in Europe, in the Balkans, and arguably maybe in Nepal as well. As the world has become a global village, as said Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian theorician, the villages not necessarily do well with each other. For example, in France, there has been a long trend of resistance towards the power of Hollywood and overall Anglo-American influence. We love their movies, their television programs, but we want to protect our brand of culture against the financial power of bigger or better organized rivals. Because culture is part of our identity, and we would feel deadly weakened if it was suppressed. We can see in many other countries, including in Europe, similar reactions. Nationalism versus globalization, as recent elections have abundantly displayed here and there in Europe. I will not name the countries, you know where they are. Many people think, how can we feel comfortable with people who don't look like us, who don't master our language, who practice alien religions, etc. We must protect our identity, promote our traditional language, religion, etc. These are common reactions which can easily lead to intolerance, fanatism, and xenophobia. Fourth point, I would like to come back to Nepal and quote Lama Guru Gyaltsen, who was struggling to preserve in Mustang the Tibetan tradition, which has been suppressed next door, says, without cultural identity, nothing remains of a people. Nepal has been the kind of country which views diversity of identities as richness, not a threat, and it is highly commendable for its tolerance. And we have all to learn from that. Fifth and last point, indeed, preserving cultural identity doesn't mean closing the doors to the outside world. As scientists like Jared Diamond show, the US scientist, people historically disappeared not because they were too much exposed to the outside world, but because they were not enough. They lacked the enrichment of culture, technologies, languages that the others could have brought them, and they perished in ecological catastrophe due to their ignorance. So to briefly conclude, it's not a conclusion actually, we must strike the right balance between protecting our cultural identity and enriching it with other cultures, what other cultures can bring to us. In the French view, cultural diversity must be promoted as required by the UNESCO Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, which was adopted largely influenced by France in 2005. And the organization of a debate like the one we have tonight reflects that aspiration. That's why I'm pleased and proud to have been able to gather all these people here. Let me thank the moderator and the panelists today, starting with my good friend Sujiv Shakya, chairperson of Nepal Economic Forum. Thanks again, Sujiv. Akankshya Tyagi, founder of Social Friendly. Alize Biannic, a professional ballet dancer. That's why she is. She has a stiff leg today. Samir Khatiwada, economist at ADB, and Swosti Rajbhandari Kayashta, curator and museum and gallery professional. Thank you, all of you, for coming. And I leave the floor, Sujiv. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Carmona. Welcome to another edition of the 4th series of debate that we've worked along with the Embassy of France and Alliance Française. Today, it's a very interesting topic. We are talking about this matter of culture. And for us as a Nepal Economic Forum, when we look at economy, it's not about only graphs and it's not about figures, it's not about numbers only. It's also about the connectivity with human beings. And when we look at connectivity with human beings, we need to also understand that the culture stands in between or at the epicenter of all this. So also in Nepal and elsewhere, there is a lot of debates around suppressing multiculturalism that still has a direct impact on the economy. That's how I'm personally seeing it. We are getting more connected, but we are also getting more isolated. Religion is back in many countries, and even like countries like China, we hear of issues relating to religion being discussed. And so today we have a very interesting panel from a very diverse panel, and I'm just going to be sort of a timekeeper here. We have Alize, a ballet dancer who's been working in Nepal for many years. We took the advantage of Samir Khatiwada being here from Manila, who works with ADB, and Swosti, who's been curates art museums and galleries, and Akankshya Tyagi from Delhi, who works on social media. So what we are going to do, the format of discussions will be, as I said, I will more be like a timekeeper. We'll just have an opening remarks on how do they personally connect to the topic, maybe about 7 to 8 minutes each around, and then on what emerges, we can get into more discussions. And we will then have a few interventions from the floor, and we assure you by about 5:45, we should be able to close this. So without much ado, may I ask, I will begin from my extreme right, asking for Alize. For you've been in Nepal, you've traveled to multiple countries, you are involved with the arts, and lots of passion around how culture interfaces. So what do you see around the whole world of culture and your own, sort of a bit of your journey and how you connect to the topic?
So, I've been here for nearly 5 years now, but I had the pleasure to actually travel a lot. So, since the age of 10, I've already been living outside of France. So I lived in Germany, I lived in Spain, I lived in UK, and then back to Nepal now. So I know most of the country before was more in Europe, so there was a lot of similarity, but each of the country had something very specific, had their own culture, had their own heritage. And that really made me understand the people. Now, I'm a ballet dancer originally, but then I also studied in drama and acting and also worked in the world of acting. So due to that, I'm always looking for the roots, the culture, why the people are living in a certain way, what would be the thing that drive them. So sometimes it's more linked with religion, sometimes not as much, it depends on which countries, but that's what I find the most beautiful thing. Now, as a director and writer, I try to use all the different things from my own heritage, but also from other countries. So I try to mix it together. Where I had a show last year, and I think you were also one of the guests there, and I tried to bring the Tamang community and bring really the roots and what was the Tamang people. So I studied it for about 5 to 6 months. I also went to a lot of Tamang villages to try to understand from them what was the story, what was the roots, what was the culture, why were they so different from other tribes and also culture in Nepal. Now, I come from a very small village in France, which is also very cultural. So I come from Brittany in France, so Pont-l'Abbé, who is all the way to the end, close to UK, but is a very Celtic place. So for us, a lot of mystery, a lot of magical things are actually in place in our culture, and also folk dance. So when I started to work with this Tamang community and I started showing them all the folk dance that we had, they said to me, it's the same step as for us, you know? And there were so many things that were very different, but at the same time, so many things that were really similar. And that's what I love about traveling to different countries and traveling to different places, because you always can find a little bit of yourself, but at the same time, you are able to see that we are all connected, even so we are from the other side of the world, even so we were born in a very different time or in different, you know, culture. We still have a lot of things that are connecting. It can be maybe a certain rhythm, it can be maybe why we are using that culture and why we're using that art. So I would say now my work over here is more to keep the culture and keep the art alive, because I believe that with art and culture we can also bring a lot of good things to the world in the way of knowledge, in the way of entertainment. So there can be so many different sides to it, where art can bring so much to the people, even healing. So I do a lot of therapy, I would say, with my artist, where I'm using drama in a way for them to understand themselves, you know, because as a performer, you're trying to reproduce either something that you've known or something that you've seen. So I love to use, for example, even all the lackey characters and all those mystical creatures that Nepal has, and try to see the link on how it can connect to us, on why it was actually brought, why do people use that in the way of art and entertaining, and to be able to use it in a certain way where we can understand the journey, what we are actually looking for, deep from inside. So I would say that's my little introduction.
No, thank you. I think I'll definitely come back to you to talk about, you know, connecting the self and the larger cultural issue as we get into the, you know, sort of our own personal journeys, your inner journeys. So Samir, I mean, now, you know, sort of your own, yeah. So having, you know, sort of living out of Nepal for so many years, transversing, you know, going around Europe, living in, you know, so many other places. So how do you see the whole, you know, so your own personal journey, and also how does this whole culture, the issue of culture and this multiculturalism mean to you?
First of all, thank you for having me over at this panel discussion. You know, I was just reflecting on this. It feels like I'm a bit of a odd fit for the panelist, because, you know, there's an art therapist to, like, you know, curator to social media expert, and I'm just an economist, right? So, but anyway, I think it's, you know, the opening statement for something like this is very difficult. I don't know where one begins really, but maybe tell a short story about oneself. So I left home about 18 years ago. I went to the US for school. So at that time, I still remember when I went for interviews, so colleges interviewed prospective students, and I went to one of the interviews here in Kathmandu, and the question that I was asked was, what do you want to do when you're finished with school? And I said, you know what, hopefully I'll come back to Nepal, do something small or large, whatever, I could do something for my country. And then this gentleman, American interviewer, looked at me and said, you know, but you know, if you lived abroad for too many years, people are going to think you're a foreigner, you're an outsider. What do you know? You've been gone for a long time. And at that time, I still remember the answer that I gave him. I said, hopefully the skill, the experience that I bring would be appreciated and maybe valued in small ways or big ways. That's yet to be seen, but I'm counting on that. I'm counting on that as as I took that bet, right? So I told my interviewer that. But of course, it's been 18 years now. I finished school a long time ago. I've been working for many years. Lived in many different countries. I'm finally kind of making my journey back to do a few things in Nepal. But, you know, I wanted to share some stories because I think there's no better way to express or talk about our thoughts on these things. But so I remember the first time I went to Colombia in South America. And I went for a hike in the Andean mountains. And the music that they play in the Andes is very similar to the music that they play in the Nepali mountains. And so I was struck by it. I was like, wow, it's very similar to Nepal. And I remember telling my partner at that time, I was like, this is very similar to what people listen to in the mountains of Nepal. And it was sort of this feeling, I was like, wow, we are so far apart. I got held up in Miami by the cops because Nepali with a handwritten passport traveling to Colombia, they thought I was a drug dealer, right? So what are you doing in Colombia? So far apart. And they're like, so then there was a thread. A thread was music in the mountains, right? So that was something that I noticed. And I thought that was a beautiful sort of a metaphor for how we have something common across cultures. So that was one experience I had. And now, looking at my current experience, I have a small kid. He's 18 months old. My wife she's a foreigner, so we speak to him in different languages. So we were just talking about this during lunch. So I speak to him only in Nepali. So he only hears Nepali from me, nothing else. And my wife speaks to him in French and Russian. She has part of her family is from Ukraine. And then the nanny speaks to him in Tagalog, the Filipino language. And then now at preschool, he hears a bit of English. English is his weakest link right now. So, but you know what's amazing? I was on mission. I was still with the ILO at that time, International Labour Organization based in Bangkok. And I was in mission in Fiji. I came back home. It was 6 months old. And I opened the door to our apartment in Bangkok, and I started just saying random things in Nepali. So it's a constant training for my wife. She encourages me to just say random things so the kids, so he hears Nepali, right? So I started saying random words and saying, you know, I went to this beautiful island, and then he was feeding in another room, and he just kind of looked around, and he knew Papa was home, right? So for me, like after having lived for a long time abroad, I've found recently that language is my one thing that I want to hold on to. I wouldn't want to lose that. That's part of my identity, that's part of my culture, that's something that I got actually, kudos to the French and the Europeans. I think they're better at this than we are because the language is so important for them. And actually for my wife it's very important. The French language for her is very important. She wants to make sure the kid knows it. And so, you know, I was like, you know what, I'm also proud of my language. So I want to make sure that my kid speaks my Nepali language. So language for me has become sort of the anchor to my home, to my culture, and I'm trying to give that to my kids.
Thanks, Samir. That's very interesting. And I think as we were discussing over lunch, I think when we are doing this panel, we are more of reflecting on our own personal journeys and try to see how we connect, because sounds a bit abstract in terms of talking about culture, but at the same time, the only way we can connect with the topic is through ourselves. So how do you connect, Swosti, with the topic and, you know, with your own journeys outside Nepal, in Nepal?
Hello. Yeah. Firstly, I'd like to begin by thanking Sujeev and also to the French Embassy and Alliance Française and everybody who's attended here. I come from an academic background, and you know, from the academic background, we always have to do research before anything. And as we discussed during our lunch, like none of you have notes this time. But then Sujeev must be like, oh, there's the notes. So sorry about that. But then I think, you know, from the academic background, we always have to be prepared with notes. And from my understanding of the topic, evolving world of culturalism, of multiculturalism, globalization, migration, and connectivity, I think all these terminologies are interconnected to each other. Migration and connectivity, which leads to globalization, and globalization, being the ancestor of multiculturalism. When we talk about multiculturalism, there are many a times when we mistake it to be similar to cultural diversity. First, I'd like to clarify these 2 points. Multiculturalism is a situation in which different cultures or racial groups in a society have equal rights and opportunities. It is a policy to give equal representation with emphasis especially to minority and underrepresented groups. Whereas cultural diversity, it has its roots there, but it is something a little different. Cultural diversity is the differences between people, and these differences root from race, culture, caste, economic background, age, gender, religion, and various other more. However, underlying the concept of multiculturalism is the belief that members of different cultures can live peacefully alongside each other in an organization or in a country. Multiculturalism goes much deeper. It focuses on inclusiveness, harmony, understanding, respect, and by looking at unequal powers in society. For example, we can say Nepal has various religious groups: Hinduism, Hindus, Buddhists, Islam, Christianity, Jainism, Sikhism, and you can name another 10 more. That is the diversity, and as His Excellency Mr. Carmona has also emphasized, that Nepal has its richness in its diversity. But what is multiculturalism is when all these communities live in harmony, coexisting with each other. That is multiculturalism. Now to talk about the historical perspective with regard to Nepal, these concepts of migration, connectivity, globalization, and multiculturalism has been a type of cultural identity of Nepal since the very ancient days. Since legendary history, we know of constant migrations from the north and from the south to our present border. And migrations can take place for various reasons. In the ancient days, we had migration from the north, mainly for trade, employment, and family bondings, and from the south, mostly displacement due to wars. From archaeological records, we know that the first historical dynasty of Nepal, the Lichavis, who came a little bit before the 2nd century Christian era, CE, they were displaced from their lands of Vaishali, and they migrated to Nepal and settled here. And when they settled here, they had to actually attack the ruling dynasty, that was the Kirat, and then displace them from there and then settle in. But however, we always talk about them coming in and assimilating the local culture. So when you ask me, if you can ask me, what did they assimilate? They assimilated the most powerful social system. That was the monarchical social system, the political system rather. They came from a republican system. So that was a big change that they assimilated when they migrated and settled in. Since then, there has been waves and waves of migration to Nepal from both the north and the south. However, we have no record of conflicts. Nepal has been like a sand pit. If you have sand in a bowl and you put drops of water, it just keeps absorbing and absorbing. So Nepal has been exactly like that. It has been absorbing, and that has led to the multicultural society that we have today. When Prithvi Narayan Shah, he conquered Kathmandu and established himself as the king of the unified Nepal, of the border that we know of today, he did not displace the locals or their culture. He in fact assimilated and accepted the practices of the outgoing king, the Newars, the Malla kings, and the first thing he did the next morning after he ascended the throne was he went to receive blessings from the Kumari. That is a typical Newar tradition. Now to come to the international context, the concept of multiculturalism started, it could have started much longer, but then it came to the limelight around the mid 1915, beginning of the 20th century. However, during the 1970s, it exploded into the political scene. Support for multiculturalism came to be seen as buying of ethnic votes. In the same way, Nepal did not fall back. During the 2008 election, the Maoist Party applied the similar strategy. They reached out to the marginalized and underrepresented groups and was successful in providing a wider political space and recognition to all of these groups. And today, Nepal is a country of 125 different ethnic groups officially. Even our new constitution of 2015 states that protecting and promoting social and cultural solidarity, tolerance and harmony, and unity in diversity. So what has all this brought us to? About 10 to 15 years ago, when multiculturalism or this diversity was not so accepted in Nepali politics, about 10 to 15 years ago in the Kathmandu Valley, what did we see? We saw mostly the Newar culture and practices of the culture being practiced. But today, after the recognition of the 125 different ethnic groups, we see a variety of cultural practices here. We see the Chhat Puja that is celebrated by the Tharus. They started celebrating it at Rani Pokhari, and after the earthquake, they were shifted to the Bishnumati River at Teku. We see the Tamang Losar and the Galpo Losar. We see Eid, we see Christianity, are all celebrated with much festivity and fanfare. During these celebrations, the community, they participate wearing their ethnic clothes, jewelries, performing ethnic dances, popularizing the ethnic food. And what does this bring us to? This brings us to an awareness of other cultures and religious practices and beliefs, thus creating a ground for harmony and an egalitarian society. Thank you.
Wow, this is amazing. So I don't think when we decided to put Swosti in the middle, we knew she had such a well-prepared, perspective. But I think what is very interesting she's brought about is that when we are talking about multiculturalism, I think we generally tend to think of international versus national, Nepal versus outside. And I think what she's brought in a very interesting perspective to it, to say that within Nepal there are multiple cultures. So when we are talking about multiculturalism, it is also within a nation is the intra-multiculturalism vis-a-vis the, the inter-multiculturalism. So lots of questions I'm going to come back to. So we move on to the final opening remarks. Akankshya Tyagi, who has been founded Social Friendly and continues to explore the digital world and the real world. Because when we are talking about multiculturalism, when we are talking about culture, the entire spectrum of the virtual world has emerged in the past 10, 15 years. And that has also let us redefine what culture means and what multicultural means. Akansha.
Thank you so much, Suji, for the wonderful introduction. And I'm really glad to be here and sitting with all the panelists. I think we talk about multiculturalism. This speaks all of it. I mean, this is more than enough. But yeah, when I got the invitation, I was kind of reflecting that, culture vis-a-vis social media. What does it mean to me personally? I Googled for a bit, but then I thought that, this is just someone else's view. What does this mean to me? So just to give a little bit background, I belong to the northern part of India. My dad is from northern India. My mom is from Bengal. She's a Bengali. My maternal grandmother is from northeastern part of India. So while growing up, because I had family members all over from the belt going to north to the northeast, and I was meeting them frequently every year, and I was fortunate enough to spend my childhood summers in Kalimpong Hills, so, and listen to the beautiful Nepali language. So, while growing up, I built this kind of habit to go out there and just understand what is the language, how is it spoken, what is the tone of communication, and kind of grab that, so to get that feel of belongingness. So that is something that I built as I was a kid. Maybe I want to play with other kids so that they could understand what I was saying easily. So then that gradually happened. I didn't do it consciously. Then I grew up, and now fortunately, if there's someone from my family who's from Uttar Pradesh, then I speak to them with that tone. And if there's someone from Northeast, then I speak to them with that tone. And if both of them are in the same room, then they mostly get confused that what is she up to? But then I did my graduation, my post-grad. I thought that, yeah, social media was up and coming, and I wanted to do something around it. And then finally, after I get this invitation, and I sit and I reflect and I see where both of these things kind of converge, is that I was fortunate enough that my family belonged to so many culturally enriched parts of the country. So I grew up with that kind of exposure. But now, because of this platform that we have, now for the first time, we have a common platform where everyone from around the world can come in and they have their voice. This also reminds me of an incident that about a decade ago, when social media was still called social networking sites, it wasn't a full-fledged media. It was still about networking. So there was this growing terminology where people said that people were sort of contemplating what social networking site would be, what's the future of it. So people came up with this this phrase, that social networking sites are going to be a virtual global village. Now fast forwarding to today's time. There are about 3 billion people all over the internet. And out of which 2 billion people are on Facebook. Just a few days back, Instagram said that they have 1 billion people as users, and now they are competing with YouTube. So, I mean, if we just reflect and kind of introspect and think about these numbers, it's no longer a platform or say an application or a global virtual village. It's practically a virtual world. And every platform is like a country because we have our voice, we can voice out our opinions, we can do trade, we can earn. We're witnessing political campaigns. We get a unique identification number whenever you're logging. Say you log into Facebook, so you get a specific number. That's your identity. You have all your details filed down. So to kind of understand where all of this is leading to is that we are slowly transitioning into a time, into a scenario where we will witness a greater integrated community, which kind of bridges the virtual and the real world. Because of internet, because of social media, we now have a borderless world. The terminology that the world is shrinking, it's really true because it is. I can sit in India, and this is, I'll quote an incident. So the first time I was coming to Kathmandu, I wanted to do my research, and I went to, Facebook, and I thought that, okay, I'll see what people are writing about it. And there are more groups by European travelers about Kathmandu than there are groups by Nepalis. And they have all the data, they have best places to stay, best places to eat, and everything. So that kind of speaks for a transition period where we are transitioning into a greater integrated community way of living, where we'll witness a cultural interdependence, interconnectedness. By cultural interdependence, interconnectedness, what I mean is maybe there'll be a financial or a trade exchange, maybe there's going to be an intellectual exchange, a knowledge exchange, or maybe just moral support. Sending out love. We know what happened in Aleppo. We didn't know what was going on unless people posted their goodbye videos. And then we, sitting at this part of the world, we were also crying for help. So that is the kind of scenario that we are transitioning into. But then, again, to kind of introspect, the greater question to ask here is that, are we ready? Are we ready for this transition? Because see, social media is there. Initially we were apprehensive of it, but now it has taken over. My parents, my grandparents, everybody is there. They're using it, they're liking it. So this transition is going to gradually happen. But how to make this transition period smooth? Now, what I mean by that is that we generally forget that people online are the same people offline. So the same stereotypes are online and the same stereotypes are offline. The same issues towards which are intolerant are offline and the same issues are online also. What does it lead to? It leads to cyberbullying. You know, it leads to harassment of journalists. We've witnessed it so many times. It leads to riots in tier 2, tier 3 cities of India because of some religious fight that these people, some kids, they started having. So now this entire scenario of accelerated multiculturalism with technology growing over and we are ready, we really want to get into an integrated way of community living where we have this amazing exchange with each other. What are we contributing to make it smooth? So what I personally think that it is a collaborative effort that we have to inbuilt, and the basis of it being awareness. The first part of it being aware that yes, we are paving a path of a greater community way of living. Then kind of doing a collaborative effort like think tanks like Nepal Economic Forum or brands that are aspirational, people, brands, organizations to whom people look up to. You know, small efforts that just say big things. For example, there are big fashion brands like Forever 21, H&M, and whenever they're, you know, coming up with a new cloth line, if you see on their Instagram pages or on their social media pages, their models are not the same stereotypical models that we witnessed, you know, 20 years back. You will see a model wearing a hijab. You will see a model of a different body type than we expect a model to be. So these are small activities, small efforts, and maybe us as general users of social media kind of being responsible towards it, yeah, and paving the path for this smoother transition.
Thank you. That is a very interesting opening round, and lots of, and I'm just thinking how we now take this discussion forward. I think a lot of issues came out. I think on one hand, we are talking about what Akankshya talks about is, you know, there's this online world, there's an offline world, and there's an integration of a different kind happening. We are also noticing that there are fractures within this, sort of the offline as well as the online world as that we are seeing, because the fractures in the online world is seen much more quickly and it has a quicker impact than what the fractures we see in the offline world. So if those are some of the issues, but at the end of the day, I mean, what is it? You know, are we talking about community? Are we talking about nation? But we are talking about ourselves, like what Alize began. And before I come to Alize on to really talk about, the linking of the awareness and the culture, I would like to go to Swosti first. And, you talked about Nepal being a sandpit, which kept on absorbing. And I think that's a very strong statement, and which we always thought it was. But do you see that changing? Because you're interacting with students, you're interacting with people in there's a sort of world that generally people are not interacting with. Do you see that sense of tolerance, there's any impact on this? So maybe I'll start with that and then we'll take it further. Yeah.
What you said and what I said about Nepal being a sandpit and whether I see that changing, I see that changing in different ways. I see a lot of Nepalis migrating, and I see a lot of non-Nepalis. I see a lot of Nepalis migrating out, and I see a lot of non-Nepalis migrating in. For various purposes, as migration has lots and lots of reasons. And from there, I see because you said about this, because I interact with students, etc. But how, after they finish their school or colleges, there are lots and lots of younger people who want to migrate abroad for better studies, and then when they study abroad, they think they have better employment opportunities abroad. But there is a small thing that we should try to understand. Just today morning, I was interacting with my students, and one of him, he is actually an elderly gentleman from the Maharajan community, and he had learned the art of Ripuse when he was younger, and he wants to do a report on not a thesis research, a mini research on Ripuse of the Patan Museum. So we were discussing. So he brought to his to the class today some of the Ripuse works that he had done. And the Ripuse is, if everybody here is not aware, the technique of beating metal and creating deities or ritual vessels or jewelry. That is a very traditional Nepali technique. So he brought some objects of ritual objects, and they were in silver, and he said that this is a kind of craft that is so traditional to Nepal, and I wanted my sons to learn this, and then he was willing to open a factory as in not a factory of large scale, but then a small scale cottage industry, to be more precise, to make these kinds of ritual objects, because they are so popular for their finesse and for their fine art, which Nepal is always so known for throughout the world. But his children, they studied various other subjects, and they did not want to do this. And he said if they do the crafts of their traditional the traditional crafts of their grandparents, then it is considered very degrading. So this is the difference that we should try to educate our young generation about, the difference between modernizing and the difference between westernizing. You know, modernizing is a concept that everybody has to go through. But then the concept of westernization is very different. What our young generation, they do not understand, they think that modernization and westernization is the same thing. So there is the difference. And I don't know if I answered your question.
I think you answered the question, but also through more questions. This is getting more interesting. And I think before, again, I would just move quickly to Samir. And because we're talking about migration, and especially for Nepalis who are going out, and you are one of them who have been exploring. And, you know, I mean, all of us explored. At some point of time, we come back and we don't come back. But I think being judgmental about that is not an issue. But over the years, you've been meeting a variety of Nepalis across many countries. What do you see is the sort of the trends that are changing in terms of how do they perceive Nepal? How do they perceive, you know, the culture of their sort of adopted country, or the culture of their adopted, you know, sort of workplace? And some of them, like ADB, is a very multicultural place. So where do some of personal reflections, Samir? You know.
Sure. You know, when we talk about migration, so I was at the ILO in Geneva for about 8 years, and 1 year I was working for their flagship publications. It's called the World of Work Report. Richard is here; he knows about this. So it comes out every year, and 1 year I was asked to write a chapter on migration and development. And so my director, he's half French, half Spaniard. So he wanted me to write a chapter basically showing that people were escaping economic crisis at home, looking for job opportunities abroad, so making a case for having when you have high levels of unemployment, vulnerable employment, that you look for better opportunities elsewhere, right? So what happened was we had a big back and forth debate over this, because as an economist, I saw the point. He's an economist as well. Okay, you know, you want employment, you want to escape deprivation, to look for something that is better paying and better life, right? But I also, you know, the thing is, when you look at migration patterns globally, you study migration for over thousands of years. People have been leaving their homes for multiple reasons, not just because of economic distress. Right now, the biggest, if you look at the share of migrant population that are displaced, forcibly displaced, is higher. People are fleeing wars, conflict, right? So, I mean, Syria was a beautiful country before it got destroyed. It had so much history. You know, so Iraq, you look at Iraq, some of these places are old cultures and civilizations. People are leaving these places not because there's no unemployment in Baghdad, because it's just, you know, life has been completely destroyed, right? So when we think of migration, I think, you know, I was just having this conversation with my mother yesterday at home, and for me, the saddest thing about our country is that we see thousands of men and women leaving Nepal to go look for employment opportunities abroad. Most of them are going into the Middle East, Malaysia. Malaysia, we've got 1 million workers in Malaysia. But every day you've got coffins coming in, people dying in the heat of Qatar, in the jungles of Malaysia, right? So the thing is, this is the first election, actually, I heard anybody say something about creating jobs. Before, when you ran for election, I never heard somebody say, I'm going to create these many jobs. Because now finally it's percolating that 40% of our GDP is from these men and women. I call them our soldiers. They're our armies. They're going out there, earning the income, sending it back to this country. So it runs, it functions, right? Otherwise, I don't know what would happen. Manufacturing is less than 10%. It's barely 8%. Services, mostly low-paid service sector jobs. So we don't have agriculture, well, forget it. Commercial agriculture is non-existent. So we are not creating jobs for low-skill, middle-skill individuals. So where do they go? They go abroad, right? So migration is not, it is about looking for economic opportunities, but it's also about the many other things that all of us want to give good future to our kids. But when you, to go back to your question about the Nepalis in different parts of the world, quickly, in a minute, you know, the thing is all of us share something that's amazing. It's beautiful and also frustrating. It's that we are very optimistic. We never lose hope. It's like, you know, yeah, okay, then maybe they'll do something this time around, you know, and we love to talk about that. And we make our little groups based on caste or political affiliation. We just get together and just say, you know what, maybe it'll get better. But that optimism has never gone away. But I'm amazed that that optimism hasn't been put to good use in terms of really achieving development milestones, right? So, but that optimism is all across. I mean, there are different groups of people you meet in the US versus in Europe and elsewhere. So in Europe, for example, you have to learn the language. It's, you know, so you're starting from, you know, scratch in a way. And in the US, you already know English when you left home. So of course, there are different set of challenges, different set of, you know, aspirations. But mostly, we are all very optimistic that country will change someday.
No, I think that's great to hear, because I have been dubbed Nepal's CEO, Chief Eternal Optimist. So from that perspective, you know, to hear, you know, but I think there is some hope, I think, at some point of time. And it's good that, I mean, definitely when I see there's a lot of more positive discourse also coming in, rather than, you know, just criticizing politicians, criticizing what's happening. So taking a slightly, you know, sort of a bit of a shift here, I mean, we talk about migration, and somebody who has, you know, coming to Nepal very regularly, you know, I mean, it's a different set of migrants, as Alize, and you know, there was this very interesting issue that Swosti brought about on modernization versus westernization, and you started off earlier in terms about who are you, you know, so questioning yourself, and in this whole discourse, where does this all stand? The awareness around, you know, sort of just probing more of the, you know, sort of probing the deeper side inside you, and looking at what does the inside of me, the awareness around the inside of me, relate to this larger discourse of westernization, modernization, and the issue of culture. And I think I'll take that, and then I'll try to, you know, plug that into the social media world.
So like I said, it's like I come also from a small place where we had also our own language, was Breton. Now, when my grandmother was young, she was actually prohibited. She wasn't allowed to actually speak that language. She was forced to speak French and forced to kind of fit, I would say, in what the government and what the society at that time wanted them to be. So forgetting their roots a little bit, forgetting a little bit where they come from, so they can become French and not Breton that are part of France. So in that sense, we lost a lot of things. We lost a lot of cultural events. We lost our language. We lost so many things that now it's slowly trying to bring it back. So when my brother was young in school, he's 3 years younger than me, so he was able to actually, again, learn our language. And that was such a big step in a sense, because I felt that people were able to understand that if you don't know where you come from, then it's very hard for you to find a value also for yourself and find who you are, like we were saying. Because until and unless you don't know where you come from, what can you bring to the world? what can you bring to what's out there? You can follow the rules and you can become a good soldier, do good work, have a family, look after your kids. But if you want something else out of life, and if you want to, you know, find that little inspiration from inside, that hope also, that can keep and stay also inside yourself, I feel that you need to know where you're from. Now, in a sense, for me, looking at kind of like all the different places and all the different countries that I've been and traveled, the first thing that I'm always looking at is understanding the culture. Understanding why people act in a certain way. What is making them act in that way? Is it because of how they were born? Is it because of how they were raised? Is it because of the religion? Is it because of the culture? Because we all have something that makes us who we are. And for me, it's like finding my own self, and every time I travel to different country, just knowing who I was and where I was from, and knowing that I had that inside me, I could feel a home in every country, where I didn't need to be in that place and maybe, you know, be surrounded by all that culture, but I needed it in my heart. So I needed to really understand and know about it. And that's what I think made me grow also to who I am today, because without that, I wouldn't be able to create. I wouldn't be able to understand other things and other culture without really understanding myself first and my culture, where I came from. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's very powerful, because I think we are using culture as a tool to really make, to introspect and go into our own internal journeys and to reflect on how you interact with others. And so social media is a platform that has, you know, sort of now created, on one hand, it has created communities, it has created a lot of, you know, sort of groups and subgroups. At the same time, it's driven people to become very big, individually very strong, your own identity. And also, you know, when we see, I mean, it has, as you mentioned earlier, it has positive and negative. So where do you see, you know, as social media evolving as we move on? Because that is also becoming a big part of how we are shaping our culture. And as we were discussing in the morning, you know, where do you see this whole, you know, the social networks, social media moving, and how is it going to impact the culture of, you know, and as individualism, culture, awareness, all these things?
So, like you said, that there is a difference between modernization and westernization. And youngsters, typically my generation, they kind of get confused between the two. I personally think that that's because that up until now, before internet, we were kind of being bombarded, with the Western way of living, whether it's the clothes that they wear, or whether it's the food that they eat, whether it's burgers or fries, or how they go to the theaters, or calling it education versus education, everything. It was always a debate, you know, amongst when we were in school also. We were always kind of debating, okay, this is what you should do, maybe because of movies or books or whatever the reason be. But now social media, because it's a platform which gives everyone a voice. So now everyone has a platform to kind of showcase their identity. It's like now we also have a chance to kind of show to people from the Western side of the world that this is how we look, this is what we wear. And interestingly, we get positive responses. They're very much interested. For example, I noticed this a lot. There are a lot of social media content curators from different parts of the world who will put up a photo of some food, and they'll write the caption, "We call it this in our country, write down in the comments what is it called in your country." And then you'll see thousands and thousands of comments from people around the world saying, okay, we call it this, we call it that, here we call it this. And then, you know, that's how the conversation flows. So like I was saying, that gradually, because now everyone has a voice, and we're kind of trying to find a synergy between our cultures, trying to find a midway. Like you said, that the music from the hills was same. So there are a lot of artists who are doing a lot of exchange. Artists from, say, Nepali artists are coming to Northeast and kind of trying to do a exchange or trying to come up with something interesting. So, like I said, that gradually we are transforming into a greater and a highly integrated community where we are going to have a lot of exchanges, whether that's culture, whether that's trade, tourism, intellectual knowledge, whichever way. So we're gradually transforming into a shrunken world which is sort of borderless.
Thank you. So this is, I think we just would like to take, sort of from the panelists, move on to the floor. If anybody has some comments or some questions, we can take a couple of them and then come back to the panel. And there are microphones available, so if anybody would have a comment or a question specific to, yeah, I see 2 hands up there. Yeah. So please do introduce yourself. Please make it brief. If it's a question, do tell us which of the panelists you want to be answered. No.
Namaste. I am Pashupati Neupane from Lumbini University Culture Department. We are discussing multiculturalism, no? So what is the difference between cross-culture, and cultural differences? That's my question. 2 beautiful ladies, Swosti and, okay, cultural, if one's culture is assimilated deeply for forever, simple definition is multiculturalism. Please clarify this.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Susan Rana. Actually, I'm not quite close to this kind of world. I come from a veterinary science background, and by some way I'm here to hear you guys talk. And while listening to you all guys, a lot of things were going into my mind actually. I'm Susan Rana. Actually, my father comes from Magar community, Magar caste. My mother is Brahmin, and I have married a newer lady. So. While listening to you guys, I was wondering what culture would be like to me. And at times when I'm in my father's home, I don't feel like I belong there. When I go to my mother's, I don't feel like I'm from there too. And now when I go to my in-laws, and in a way, I don't fit in there too. So I don't know where actually I belong to. And that was actually a very hard question from Alize, actually. You have to know where you come from. That's something really very good to hear, but when it's a question asked to me, then it would be quite difficult for me. I don't know what I am going to adopt or what I'm going to do. I never lived with my grandparents, my father's parents, so I don't know what exactly Magar culture is like. And I don't know if that's the same with other families, but in my family, my mother was dominant, maybe. Maybe we inherited a lot, kind of our culture, I think. And now I have a newer wife. So there's kind of a conflict going on in there. And I don't know what my daughter would be like. At times I tell people, if we talk about genetics, my daughter is 50% Newar, something like 31% Brahmin, and the rest Magar. So I don't know what she's going to be like in the future. So yeah, so I don't know if that's a quite specific, a specific question to you all.
No, I think, no, that's great. I think it just builds up the discourse better. I think we have a gentleman in the front.
Yeah, I'll just round up. So yeah, I don't know if you guys can address it or not, I don't know. But yeah, and relating it to media actually, there's this problem kind of thing with the media too. As you said, Tyagi said earlier, Ms. Tyagi said earlier that people are the same online and offline, but while delving into the media thing, I feel like people are not the same online and offline, you know. You feel like at times somebody is so close to you in the media, and when you see them in person, they don't even look at you, see? So I don't know where our culture is leading us to, where this globalization thing is going and all. So I don't know if you can address this or not. These are all my thoughts. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very interesting comment and a question. So, okay, one.
Thank you. I'm from government side, and I have one question. You know, culture should be pure, and it should remain pure. And I will take an example that mixing of culture is not good one. And the example is that in Nepali culture, while we celebrate birthday, the cutting cake and distributing the piece of cake is not a Nepali culture. And I want the answer from the Tyagi and the Kayashta ma'am. So is it good one? The Nepalese person, we have one identity, one culture, one way of living, we have one rituals, and we have distinct pattern of living our life. So, by seeing others' view, by seeing others' idea, we are mixing our Nepali typical culture to the westernization or any other's name. So I think it is good one or bad one. Just it's a debate. So I want your answer. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Any more hands we have? Okay, the lady in the front.
Avas Rashta. I'm trained as an anthropologist with many years working experience with the ADB and the World Bank. Now with myself. I'm just back from New York, and what better place could New York be than a melting pot? And I thoroughly enjoyed all of your personal experiences. My observation here is you've mentioned music and language as a means of connectivity. What about food? I thought you completely left out food. Especially after coming from New York. You get everything. I think that's an excellent means of connectivity. That's all I wanted to add. Very, very good presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, there's a gentleman in the back. I think there's the last one before we move back to the panel. Yeah.
I am Bamdev Adhikari from Tribhuvan University. The ladies talked about multiculturalism, immigration, and globalization. Yes, immigration was there from the very beginning of civilizations, and it continues. We don't know up to when. But now I see from civilizational levels, this problem is major problem in two civilizations, mainly Indo-Aryan civilizations and Anglo-Saxon civilizations. Especially in Islamic civilizations and Confucian civilizations, these problems are not major problems. It's not question, only my compliment. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think it's a very interesting set of comments and questions. And I think before I pass on, it's also that how we personally define. Like, for instance, like the gentleman out there said, so as the beautiful lady said, you would never say as the handsome coordinator said, So it is only, it is a culture where we compliment, the way we, sort of look at women, or, the cultural biases around that. So there is a lot of issues that we talk about. What is pure? Like, and we talk about pure, like when we do our rituals, we can be pure, but you can still be dirty. So what does that mean? So if you look at our temples, if you look at, our worship places, it can be very dirty, but it is deemed to be pure if you would sprinkle some pure water. So I think there's also these personal reflections I like to, as I couldn't resist to talk about. So maybe we can do a round of, answering some of the very pertinent issues that so sense of belonging is big. I mean, the gentleman asked, I go through the same issue. I think in this piece I wrote as a Himalayan citizen in this anthology called Himalayan Arc, I said, I belong, for me, home is where hills and I meet. So that could be in Rwanda, it could be in Cambodia, it could be, in Colorado, wherever hills and, hills and I meet, that is home for me. So the same situation, neither my parents' place or my in-laws' place or anybody else's place, that's home for me. So you tend to define your own space of what culture means to you. So maybe we'll come with the final round starting from Alize, we'll come this way. Okay, maybe 3 to 4 minutes each, yeah.
All right, so there was a lot of nice question, and like you said, your mom's comes from a certain tribes, your father from another one, now your wife from another one, but it's very difficult, and it's very good for Nepal, by the way, because I learned that parents didn't want to mix the tribe too much. So you're very lucky, I guess. So it can be hard because you want to find yourself. You want to find who you are in all of this. And from my personal experience, I have my best friend who works now in a very high post in Paris. His parents were against religion. So all his life, he was never brought up in a religious way. And he was always shown that religion was something that you should avoid. Now, for him and for his own self, he wanted to understand actually what it was. So he did a lot of research, and he researched a lot of different religions to see what would fit him. But still, at the end of the day, he realized that after all of those years of research and work, that was not the thing that was missing. And I come from the ocean, and he also comes from the ocean. So for him, the ocean is his culture. The ocean is his roots. And just going to the sea and looking at just the ocean on a heavy rainy day, or just a beautiful sunny day, or just looking at the fish in the water, that is actually his roots. And that's actually where he can feel that that's who he is and where he comes from. So it doesn't have to be religion in a sense, but it's true that religion takes a lot of, big position, especially in Nepal also. And that can help you, but that's not the only thing that I think, no? To answer your question. Otherwise, so even like we were saying about social media and mixing things, and we talk about a lot of food for lunch, so that's why we didn't brought up the subject of food right now. And we left out a little bit of the art, so we had to recuperate that. So it's true that sometimes with social media, we can feel that we can actually have a stronger voice that we might feel that we don't have in the everyday life. Like many people in social media feel more comfortable to say things and maybe to offend also other people. It's not always in a positive way. It can also be negative, where they might say certain things that they don't actually believe, but maybe just because they want to look cool on the media, or they want to be celebrity, and they want to separate themselves from the real world. So for me, who is more living directly with the people, I actually try to avoid social media, and that's why I probably like Nepal. Because of all those electricity cuts and all those things where you don't have always the opportunity to use social media, and I try to use it more directly with the connection of people. So whatever is happening, whatever subject is there, social media can help, but that's also not the only way that we can change things. It's more about human connection and human relationship, and just being able to work together as a community. So that's why I think for me, community thing is the main thing. We have a lot of community in Nepal, and that's how we can really be strong, and that's how we can really be connected together, and that's how we feel home, no matter where we are. Like my dancers, they said to me, oh, when we are going on tour, how are we gonna do, 1 week without dalbat? So, oh, yes, because it's not possible, no? Like, in France, if you go to France, you want to ask dalbat, maybe in the big city, but it's very hard, no, I think. It's the same thing for me here. I used to love eating, cheese and all those French dry meat. Luckily now we have François and Antoine that are providing those kind of delicacy. But it's true that, that is also part of our culture and part of what we can bring to other people. My grandmother, she's the best cook. So every time I go home, she always asks me, what do you want me to cook, which specialties? So I always give her a little list of things, and that's the thing that we can bring to our children. That's how we can keep our culture and our traditional keep alive, by, the food, being together, seeing that community, that family part. I think that's so important for us to grow. Even if you want to travel abroad, if you want to stay in Nepal, that would be the thing that will make us strong. That's my belief.
Thank you. Wow, it's hard to follow from that. Okay, well, I just kind of wanted to get at this question of mixing of cultures. Look, I think I'm a product of that, so I wouldn't say it's a bad thing at all. Actually, I look at my kid. He's a mixed kid, and he's the most beautiful thing, at least for me. So look, the thing is, that's the world we live in, right? So whether you want to accept it or not, it's a different story. But Mixing of cultures, actually, we were having this conversation earlier during lunch, and the ambassador made it's a nice framework, and I'm going to talk about that. So basically, culture could either lead to prejudice, or it could lead to openness and acceptance, right? So as you said, if you think that culture shouldn't be mixed, then we're going to stay prejudiced. And prejudice, if you look at small kids, when my kid goes to the playground in preschool, he's playing with white, black, brown, different languages, different parents. He doesn't know any difference at all. Unless I tell him, unless I teach him prejudice, he doesn't know prejudice. So prejudice we're not born with. We are taught to be prejudiced. So mixing of cultures actually allows us to be less prejudiced. It allows us to be more open. At least that's my view. I could be completely wrong, but that's my view. I mean, look at the global, what's happening around the world. There's a backlash against this view of acceptance, of multiculturalism. There's a backlash, and there's a reason why there's a backlash. And it goes back to some of the things we all have said. Because we all, as human beings, need something to hold on to, right? Way of life, language, culture, food, what have you. We need something to hold on to, because there's a sense of belonging, sense of identity. We all need that. And the gentleman who said, I don't know where I belong, it's a valid point. So I'm never going to ask that to my son. I don't know where he will belong, right? So the thing is, but it's okay. So we will have something to hold on to. Maybe he'll have his father's language. Maybe he'll have his mother's language. Maybe mother's food. I don't know. You pick those things and you hold on to it. But the backlash that's been happening globally is because now we actually have gotten to a level in the public discourse, especially in the Western world, in America especially so, with Obama in the White House. I'm not speaking as ADB staff. I want to talk about this political stuff. But the thing is, so, the backlash is because we have maybe gone too far in certain aspects. But that doesn't make it a negative thing, that mixing of cultures, because that's what unites us. That's what makes us come together. I'll tell you a story from a grad school. When I was in Boston, so we had to put a name tag on the front, so our name was always there, so the teacher could call out our name. So my first class, I went to my master's program, and I was sitting by myself at my desk, and then somebody came in and he put his name, David Almaleh. He was a French guy, and so he looked at me and said, "I'm David," and I said, "I'm Samir." And then David asked me, "Where are you from?" And first I said, "You must be French," and he's like, "Yeah, I know, I've got a thick accent," and I was like, yeah. So, and then he looked at me and said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from Morocco." With a straight face, with a straight face. I said, "I'm from Morocco." And he's like, "Ah, vous parlez français, you speak French, right?" And then I was like, "Well, guess what? I understand your language, but I don't want to speak it, because you are the former colonizers." I was pulling his leg, the whole thing. But I had a straight face when I said that to him. And he looked at me, he's like, he was completely shocked, right? He was like, "Who's this guy?" Like, completely crazy. The teacher came and they started teaching. 2 months passed by. He was, we were at a party and he was dancing with one of my friends. And then he says, "Oh, this guy Samir is from Morocco. He's in your class, in your program." And then she goes, "Morocco, Samir? I only know Nepali Samir." And then so there was no other Samirs in our class, right? And then he comes up to me and he says, like he was half drunk and whatever. So he's like, got really mad at me for pulling his leg. But as it turns out, David's dad came from Morocco when he was 2 years old. They're French. Mom came from Spain, right? So now he's one of my best friends. Because that little story, I just came up with because I had heard of him as being the smartest kid at Polytechnique. He had topped his class, so I wanted to actually just tease him, right? That's what I was doing. But as it turns out, he had a connection to Morocco after all. And why did I have to say Morocco? I have no idea, But somehow that situation brought us together, made us very good friends. I'm just telling you that mixing of cultures, mixing of our practices, it's a beautiful thing. My son, says darshan when he sees a deity. He says darshan to his grandparents, but when he sees his grandparents in Geneva, he talks to them in their language, and we also have a Christian deity in our house. We also have Hindu pictures. So, it's all mixed, right? And we celebrate all the holidays. We will keep doing it with our kids. We'll celebrate all the holidays, Nepali and non-Nepali. Because I actually, since I've left home such a long time ago, I've traveled from New Zealand to Norway, to Sweden, to Colombia, to Cuba. Seeing all of that, I think, I think the way to go is about sharing what is good. You know, French wine is good no matter where you go, right? But the Nepali khasiko masu is amazing as well, with some sag, no? That's very good food. So, you know, there's good things about different parts of the world. We gotta take the good things and then make something out of it. I think that's my view. I mean, you take it or leave it, but yeah.
I think the conversations are getting more and more interesting, and from my perspective, to answer some of the questions, firstly was of cross-culture. From my perspective, I think cross-culture is something that the second gentleman spoke about, and it is it can be applied in various ways. In one of the ways is how the second gentleman spoke about him coming from a Mughal family and his father from a different, his wife from a different. That is cross-culture. And then cross-culture can be utilized through art residencies of people from different countries coming together and working together. And I think this topic was also touched upon earlier by the panelists. And there, what happens is you develop a better understanding of each other's culture. And what the second gentleman spoke about as a challenge of his identity, I think it is an opportunity. It is an opportunity to be united, to have an openness, and to know about 3 different cultures. And then you are an expert, you can talk about any 3 cultures. Like, I would be able to talk more comfortably about Newars, and somebody else from belonging to that particular culture will be more comfortable to be talking from that particular culture. But you can talk about 3 different cultures, and that is a big opportunity, I think. And then talking about the purity of culture, I would like to mention that culture is something that is dynamic. It is not static. It is something that changes. And that change and that modernism is linked, very much linked, not westernization, okay? So I had prepared a little bit about my closing note, and I will mention that. I said the concepts of migration and globalization are a part of development and progress. And this progress is what we call modernization, something that cannot be controlled because it has to happen. Like centuries ago, we did not have toilets, not only in Nepal, but even in Europe. They didn't have toilets inside the houses. They used what we called copras everywhere in the world. And then in the morning, they threw them outside. That happened everywhere, not only in Nepal, in all the very developed countries that are now also. So, as the introductory note mentioned that, of the invitation, mentioned that there are many challenges that the world faces because of multiculturalism, but however, every challenge comes with opportunities as well. Accepting the numerous challenges, I feel that globalization has actually highlighted the concept of identity, nationalism, preservation of cultural traditions. In my recent stay at the US with a Nepali family, I noticed the closeness of the community. And it was not only the Newar community or the Brahmin community, it was a whole closed group, it was a whole open group of Nepalis. And I noticed there are various efforts to teach their children, their foreign-born children, about their identity, about their culture, etc. And most of us here have also witnessed our relatives based in outside countries besides Nepal. They return back to Nepal to perform various ceremonies of rites of passage that we have, Bartaman, Gufa, and all that. They return back here to celebrate those festivals with these ceremonies with their loved ones here, and so that their children are aware of their identity. These examples show that cultural connections are seldom lost, no matter what. And then coming back to what His Excellency in his opening statement said, and Alize mentioned, and Sujeev also mentioned, that feeling comfortable with one's identity is very important. So that is why these practices are being continued and these traditions are being continued. And as I am speaking mostly from the Nepali perspective, being a heritage scholar of Nepal, so that is the main reason why I again mentioned that Nepalis based abroad, they come back here to celebrate these various festivals and functions to maintain their identity. And unless you are comfortable with your own identity, you cannot, it's not a matter of cannot, but then it's very difficult to relate to multiculturalism or cross-culturalism or any kind of other globalization concepts. Thank you.
Marks?
So I won't take much time. But just a little story after hearing all your questions and on all the panels that I've said. So as I said, that my family belongs to all the regions from north to northeast. So while I was growing up, I was just 2 years old, had not yet learned how to speak. My father was really concerned because he thought that I will not learn how to speak at all, because there were so many family members speaking in different languages at the same time. But then I learned how to speak Hindi. I can moderately speak English well because of the education that we got. I learned how to speak Bengali. I can understand Ahomia and bits of Nepali. And if you ask me what makes me feel at home, nothing beats sel roti and piro aloo. And I make sure every time I come to Kathmandu that I take dalle back, some dalle ko achar. So bringing back to all the questions that come up, personally what I feel, that culture is what makes you feel rooted. So I feel rooted when I have dalle ko achar with dal bhat, because that's what I ate when I was growing up. Or I go to momo vendors and ask them, would you be putting boso in the momo that you're cooking? And I don't like momos in Delhi because they don't make the dalle chutney. So that makes me feel rooted. So I think that's what culture is all about, where you feel at home.
No, thank you. I think it's been a great panel. I think just to clarify some of the words Akankshya was using, she was talking about sel roti and aloo. And when she was talking about momo, she was talking about boso, which is the fat that goes into the momo meat that makes momos so tasty. So this has been amazing. I think, when we talk about culture, I think I can't resist but to talk about adaptability. And I think when I personally reflect on my own personal life and having been brought up, we discussed over lunch on the prejudice, without having prejudice on any culture, I think that gave me the adaptability, and perhaps now we can work in multiple countries. We are working in multiple countries, and not only, and having team members work in multiple countries, basically because you have that adaptability to culture. And I think as Nepalis, we see that we are much more adaptable than many other communities. That's why we see them in the, in places that you would never imagine that they would be there. And I think that's a very interesting way of also looking at culture. Ambassador, would you want to make a few final remarks before I close?
Thank you very much. At first, I would like to thank everybody, Sujeev and the panelists, and also the very interesting words and the questions from the floor. And just one word to answer the gentleman who has difficulties to define himself, considering his parents and history. Become French. Everyone can become French. And I would like to quote an American president, no, not the current one, often. Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, who said, everyone has two fatherlands, his own and France. And I'm not doing a nationalist show here, but just to say that you belong to what you choose. And if you choose to learn the French language, this is a perfect place here. You can be part of what worldwide identity, including Morocco. You can pretend to be Moroccan, and there is not a country in the world, no country in the world, where you wouldn't find someone who doesn't speak French. Even China, even India, and other big countries. So again, it's not a nationalist point. What we mean by organizing debates like today is not to impose the French view. Actually, everybody speaks English here. But what we have in mind is to add some angles to the debate, and these angles, these original angles, are connected to the French view of things and the French education. Alliance Française was founded in 1883. It's been on stage for such a long time, and it's still growing. It's still everywhere in the world welcoming thousands, hundreds of thousands of students who come to learn the language, but not only the language, it's much more than the language. It's to try to have tools to better communicate and to better exchange cultural experiences. Thank you, everybody, for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Round of applause to the panelists, and also thank you to Pauline, AFK, and the team here, the team at Nepal Economic Forum for putting all this together. And we look forward to staying in touch. So since you have registered, you'll get a copy of the proceedings report that will be coming in. And we look forward to meeting you at the next debate. Thank you very much.